Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is, as introduced, Charity Cele, and I'll be presenting to you preliminary results of an ongoing, fairly new study that we are currently undertaking. So I'll be looking at biodiversity stewardship as a tool in sustaining freshwater service delivery, with the case study being the Pongola River. Just briefly, South Africa is very rich in biodiversity in terms of our flora and fauna. However, it's being threatened because of the huge transformation is currently going on. That's agriculture production and urban development. To address this, a biodiversity stewardship program was developed as a mechanism to reduce the threatening of these species. It's basically an agreement between the landowners and facilitator to ensure that the land is properly managed, to not compromise the natural resources on that land. The Nkangala Grassland program, where I am based, also adopted this mechanism and tool. Let me just speak very briefly about it. The reason why we did this is so we can ensure that the landowners also understand the importance of natural resources and the roles that they can play as custodians to protect the grasslands. Grasslands are one of the second largest biome with variety of species, and they produce such important ecosystem services. The two services being water production from rivers, as well as water purification from wetlands. I'll be focusing more on water production from rivers. Just to put everybody in the picture, ecosystem services can be defined as the benefits or services provided to humans by the environment, natural resources, and a healthy functioning ecosystem. There are various types of ecosystem services and various benefits you get from them, such as food production, firewood, medicinal plants, animal harvesting, water production, rivers, and water purification from wetlands. Essentially, ecosystem services form part of stewardship. It is a social aspect of stewardship. So it focuses and encourages social development amongst the community, economic prosperity amongst the community, as well as food security amongst the community. So it's a very important component of stewardship. The aim of this study is to determine whether the biodiversity stewardship program can be successfully implemented along the Pongola River to ensure sustained freshwater service delivery. The objectives were to establish the progress of the biodiversity stewardship program, to determine the perception of the Pongola Bush landowners on biodiversity stewardship program, Pongola Bush being the region, the area within the Nkangala grassland domain, the headwaters of Pongola River, to determine the ecosystem services provided by the Pongola River. My study area, sorry. Thank you. My study area is located in Mpumalanga. The Pongola River flows down eastwards, down into the Pongola port, flows all the way north into Mozambique. It feeds into the Jozini Dam, as well as the Bavana Dam, which is an important focus for the study. There's several tributaries to the river, as you can see all around. And the river is important because there's also irrigation going along the river. Especially with what I'd like you all to note is that there is 16,000 hectares of sugarcane plantation in the midsection of the Pongola River. There's 1,000 hectares of citrus and mangoes and vegetables, but there's 16,000 hectares of sugarcane plantations. The methodology used to conduct the study, we used a qualitative approach, a non-random sampling technique where I knew the characteristics that I was looking for in terms of the landowners from the Pongola Bush, where there's the headwaters of the Pongola River, the facilitators from the Nkangala grassland area, where the Pongola Bush is within the Nkangala grasslands area. I also used primary sources, semi-structured interviews. That's a question example of part of a questionnaire I gave to the landowners of that area. And I also used secondary sources, being annual reports, as well as relevant literature. Results. Excuse me. Okay. The first objective was to establish the progress of biodiversity stewardship. We can comfortably say that it is indubitable that this program is successful. Looking at the Nkangala grasslands area, we were able to clear alien species, especially the wattle. There was wetland rehabilitation. With alien clearing, there's improvement in the quality of river, quality of the headwaters within the Nkangala area, the four headwaters, the Val, Tigela, Pongola, as well as Limfolos. With wetland rehabilitation as well, the jobs are able to be created, along with alien clearing, jobs are created, wetland rehabilitation, there's retention of water, especially now during the drought season, and as well for agriculture. There's improvements in grazing in farmlands, which increases production for the farmers. There's proper fire management in farmlands and with the landowners, where through the Biodiversity Stewardship program, the farmers were advised and given fire breaks to control the fires. So the program itself is working and it is successful. It is conserving our natural resources and it is preventing the loss of biodiversity. With that said, though, there still can be improvements. We divided the improvements into three. We said funding, the issue of undercapacitation within the program, and government collaborations with NGOs need to be strengthened. The Biodiversity Stewardship Program, as indicated earlier, it's important because it encourages the wise and proper management of natural resources. It encourages it encourages the prevention of and conservation of biodiversity. And it is important for the provisioning of ecosystem services. It is important. Now, if there is a lack of funding, which Wesley touched on a bit, how can we meet this demand that is required to make sure that the biodiversity program succeeds? If there is an undercapacitation within the program itself, how can we ensure that there's funding for fences? How can we ensure that we can provide our landowners with herbicides to get rid of all these alien species and pesticides, etc.? These are the questions that we sometimes have to ask ourselves if we really want this program to continue succeeding. With government collaborations, I think we should note that the Biodiversity Stewardship Program is not an entity on its own. It needs, which is what Ezemvelo spoke about. It's interesting how everything just ties together. Ezemvelo spoke about is that the Biodiversity Stewardship Program meets the provincial targets from the protected areas expansion strategy. So it's important that the government also collaborates with facilitators and NGOs to ensure that there's proper management of these farms, that there's incentives, benefits for the landowners to ensure that we do fulfill the purpose of biodiversity, which stewardship program, which is to protect our natural resources, prevent the loss of biodiversity, and encourage and support the provisioning of ecosystem services. The second objective was to determine the perception of landowners, Pongola Bush, on biodiversity stewardship program. This objective is more of a reflective objective. It's for us to know what we're really doing as facilitators, if it's really working, and the input that these farmers feel in order to determine further expansion and engagement in other farmers. According to order of importance, most farmers, generally we received a positive response, so that was great. But according to the order of responses, most farmers believe that there's better management of their farms. With better management of their farms came an increase of production. So better management, they spoke about felt management, regulating cattle on camps to decrease overgrazing. Most of them were impressed with the alien clearing, especially the wattle species. They said that with the clearing of the wattle, the water was much clearer, the river was much clearer. It increased the quality of the water, therefore the cattle were able to drink. That in itself is a very important example of an ecosystem provided by fresh water. They moved on and viewed stewardship as a problem solver. They felt security within an agreement. That's okay, fine. If I'm signing this agreement, I know that I'm at least protected from further mining threats. They saw it as security in terms of hoping for incentives such as fencing and herbicides to protect theft and poaching, etc. And some of them agreed that lessons were learned. Some of them did not know that there's more to grasses than just grass. They were educated in terms of what is good grass, bad grass, how to manage your velds for increased production. So they had a very positive response towards the Biodiversity Stewardship Program. The third objective was to determine the ecosystem service provided by the Pongola River, which was very interesting. It's a very interesting finding for me because we went there with an assumption and we came out with something completely different, but it was very interesting. Before we determined the services, I had to go back and look at the health of the river in order to determine the quality of services that can be provided by the river. According to the Zululand District Municipality Water Service Development Plan, the Pongola River, out of the Mhlatuzi as well as the Kuzi River, is the least utilized river and least utilized and least stressed, only because there's no community living adjacent to the river. However, it did not excuse, and when we found that out when I was speaking to the water service technician from the municipality, it did not excuse the level of pollution in the river. Because if you remember earlier, the 16,000 hectares of sugarcane farming, the herbicides and pesticides released from these farming. So therefore, with all this pesticides, herbicide will run downstream. Okay. So I took it upon myself. I had the liberty to divide these ecosystem services, direct and indirect. For direct, the commercial farmers, sugarcane farmers, gets direct water from the rivers. It's through a piping system. It's important for irrigation and the running of the factory. The indirect is the community. The reason why it's indirect is because the municipality supplies the community with water. But get this, it's not municipality supplying the community with water from the Pongola River because it isn't polluted. They supply the community with water from the Bavana Dam, which is not enough to sustain the Bethal, south of Kandova, the Zumnyama, and the Hlavanati community. It's not enough water to sustain them, especially because of the drought season. And there, we questions again, what happens with this whole ecosystem services, water provisioning for the community. If they had access to this water, all right. The community said that they use this water for drinking, cooking, bathing, washing. It's important for their cattle to drink and for irrigation. Okay. Excuse me a breath. Thank you. What does all this mean? Revisiting the purpose of stewardship that I introduced and indicated earlier. The purpose of stewardship is to ensure that there is proper management of our natural resources, wise use of our natural resources, that our biodiversity does not get compromised or lost. And most importantly, that there is a provisioning and improvement in ecosystem services. Yes, from the facilitator's response and from the landowner's response, one can comfortably stand and say, our natural resources are being managed. There's no loss, the losing of our biodiversity. But one has to question the use of ecosystem services. What is interesting was that we went in expecting the community to pollute the river, and we walked out knowing that the commercial farmers are the ones that are actually polluting. It's very ironic how they're using the service which in turn is actually harming the river. If there's no ecosystem service providing, which is in this case water for the community, then it questions the social aspect of stewardship, which is the ecosystem services. Because there's no access to proper water services, social development is compromised. There's no economic prosperity, and there's no food security because there's no cattle, there's no water for cattle to drink, and there's no proper irrigation. With this, this brings areas of development, something that I'm interested in exploring as well, and your insights will be more than welcome. And critical questions as well critical questions of how, this area of, that 5 minutes just threw me way off. Anyway, let's go get back to this presentation. Okay. This brings in critical questions and possible areas of development. We should ask ourselves, why can't we explore, or what can we do to explore the ecosystem services, the social aspects of stewardship? Yes, we've got our management plans. Yes, we've got our annual plans of operation that emphasize on the natural resource management. But where does the ecosystem, where does social aspects of our stewardship come in? What can be done? Who monitors these ecosystem services? We state, it's written in our reports that yes, biodiversity stewardship is working because of da-da-da-da-da, and provisioning of ecosystem services. Who goes back and monitors and follows up the impact of these, the impact of the ecosystem services? Freshwater supply. Who gets this freshwater supply? Is there equitable access to this freshwater supply? Recommendations and conclusion. As a recommendation, follow up on ecosystem services. Provisioning of water is very important in order to ensure that the biodiversity stewardship program is really successful and it stands for what it means and its purpose is fulfilled. What is great about this, though, is that we are covered an area of expansion because of the commercial farmers that's along the Pongola River. We can engage with them, and this will continue showing in order to ensure that there is sustained ecosystem services. What we think is a good idea is that we'll be able to implement what we've done in the Kangala Grasslands program, where fresh waters are sustained, where the natural resources are protected and the biodiversity is not lost. If that can be done at the Nkangala Grassland program, surely it can be implemented along the Pongola River. Thank you.